When the fire dies, the world changes. The air turns heavy. The cold doesn't rush in, it waits. Inside the teepee, the light fades to breath and shadow. No crackling wood, no glow, just silence, alive and listening. Most people today would panic. They'd grab another blanket, another match. But out on the Great Plains, that moment wasn't fear, it was routine. They expected the fire to die. They were ready for it. Because warmth didn't only come from flame, it came from the ground, from breath, from the way they lived. They didn't fight the night. They planned for it. They prepared for the time when the fire sleeps. When the fire went out in the night, the air turned cold fast. The teepee stopped glowing and the walls froze in place. But the people didn't panic. They had already built their warmth before the fire was ever lit. They never slept on bare dirt. They built the floor the same way they built a fire layer by layer. First came willow branches cut thin and laid close together. Then dry grass packed down by hand until it felt soft and thick. On top, heavy hides, buffalo or elk still smelling of smoke. Those hides trapped the last breath of heat from the night fire. The Mandan went one step further. Before sleeping, they pulled glowing stones from the edge of the fire pit and buried them under the floor. The stones stayed warm for hours. Even when the teepee went dark, the ground still gave off a slow, steady heat. Children could press a hand to the floor and feel it not hot, but alive with warmth. The Lakota and Pawnee knew this too. They trusted the ground more than the wind above. The air could turn deadly in minutes, but the earth held its heat deep. So every home started from the bottom: grass, hide, and patience. Today we build floors to look good. They built theirs to stay alive. And when the last ember faded, that floor kept breathing just enough warmth to make it to morning. For them, the ground wasn't dirt. It was protection, the first blanket that never failed. When the fire burned low, the teepee still stayed warm. The people didn't trap the air, they let it move. They understood that air could be a helper, not an enemy. Each teepee had two openings. A small gap near the ground pulled in fresh air. Another at the top let smoke rise and escape. Even in freezing weather, these vents stayed open. The hides were not sealed tight. They were tied just enough to breathe. The Lakota and Blackfoot knew that still air brings frost. If smoke stays, the air turns wet. And when the air gets wet, it freezes inside the lodge. So they kept the smoke moving. Warm air rose, cold air sank, and the fire pulled both through a steady flow. When the flame went out, the same pattern continued. Body heat replaced the fire's heat. Each breath from the people and the dogs kept the air drifting upward. The inside stayed dry, the hide stayed flexible, and no ice grew on the walls. It was simple, but it worked every time. No fancy tools, no metal pipes. Just good design built from patience, wind, and time. That's why the old teepees didn't need insulation. They used the air itself to carry warmth and take away moisture. Every breath mattered. Every opening had a purpose. And when the storm pushed hard against the walls, the lodge kept breathing steady, silent, alive. When air moves, heat survives. That's how they made a home that never froze, even when the fire slept. When the cold hit, hardest fire wasn't always enough. Sometimes the wind was too strong or the wood too wet. So the people learned to keep the warmth on their own skin. The Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Inuit used what nature gave them. They took animal fat, buffalo tallow bear grease, or seal oil. They mixed it with fine ash from the fire. Then they rubbed it over their faces, hands, and arms before going out. It covered the skin like a shield. It blocked the wind, sealed the pores, and held body heat inside. The fat didn't just keep them warm, it kept the skin alive. In freezing wind, bare skin cracks fast, but with a layer of grease and ash, it stayed soft and flexible. Even after hours in the snow, their hands could still move. Their faces didn't freeze. It smelled like smoke and earth, but it worked. You could see it on every hunter's face, a dark, shiny coat against the frost. The women did the same before long trips or work in the open air. It wasn't for beauty. It was survival. When storms came and the fire couldn't reach them, this thin layer kept them alive. They didn't fear frostbite because they carried their protection with them. Every hunter knew if the wind can't touch your skin, it can't take your heat. That's how the body became its own furnace, not with power, but with patience and habit. A simple mix of fat and ash could mean the difference between life and death in the cold. When the fire burned low, people didn't move apart, they moved closer. The last warmth of the night came from each other. Inside a teepee, every family had a pattern. They didn't just lie down anywhere. They slept in a circle close to the fire pit. Children stayed between parents or grandparents. The elders faced the door, the strongest hunters near the cold side. Everyone had a place that made sense by age, by duty, by warmth. The ground was lined with hides, and more hides were pulled over the top. No blankets, no pillows, just skin against hide and hide against earth. Each body gave off heat. Each breath added to the air inside the teepee. One person alone could not fight the cold, but together they made their own weather. At night, the teepee went quiet except for breathing. You could hear it slow, steady, all in rhythm. The smoke holes stayed open, but the air stayed warm near the ground. Even when the wind howled outside inside, there was still comfort. The Cheyenne and Lakota called it common sense. You stay close, you share what you have, even body heat. No one froze alone. The cold might take a man in the open, but never a family sleeping side by side. When the embers turned gray, they still had each other. That was enough, because the fire in the middle could fade, but the warmth between them stayed. Out on the plains, fire was too precious to waste. You never let it die, if you could help it. The Mandan and Hidatsa knew that a single ember could save a morning. Before sleeping, they always prepared the fire pit. When the flames were almost gone, they took a small coal, just one glowing red in the dark. They buried it deep under a pile of ash and dry dung. Then they covered the pit with a flat stone or packed soil to hold the heat inside. No wind, no frost, no air. The ember stayed alive through the night. By morning, it didn't look like much, just a gray patch under dust. But if you brushed it open with a stick, it glowed again, bright and ready. You could drop dry grass on it and watch the smoke rise. No flint, no spark, just yesterday's fire still waiting. Every family had its own way. Some kept the ember inside the lodge, others carried it to the next camp. They used hollowed buffalo horn or a clay bowl packed with ash to move it safely. That small red coal meant they didn't have to start from nothing each day. It was more than saving effort. It was saving time, warmth, and comfort. Because when the sun disappeared for weeks, finding dry tinder was hard. But a hidden ember could turn back into flame in seconds. They didn't call it clever, they called it normal. That's how they kept fire alive through the longest winter nights, one coal at a time. When the fire went out, they didn't stop moving. The Pawnee and Dakota knew that stillness could be dangerous. If you sit too long, the cold finds you. So they kept their hands working. Before sunrise, someone checked the traps. Another scraped hides or cut meat frozen stiff from the night. The young carried wood, the elders fixed tools. Every movement sent warmth through the muscles. They didn't rush. They didn't waste. Each task had a rhythm, steady and controlled. Too much movement, and you sweat. Too little, and you freeze. They found the line between the two and stayed there. You could see it in their mornings. One person stirring the coals, another brushing frost from a bowstring. Steam rising from breath and fur. The camp waking not from noise but from motion. Even inside the lodges, when storms locked them in, they kept busy. Hands twisting sinew cord, shaping bone needles, softening hides. The work never stopped. The body never cooled. For them, warmth didn't only come from fire or skin. It came from what they did. Movement was the second fire, one that lived inside muscle and will. They didn't talk about survival. They practiced it every minute. Because on the plains, the rule was simple. Keep moving, keep warm, stay alive. There were nights when the wind never stopped. The cold was so deep, it made your hands shake even near the fire. But the Lakota and Mandan learned how to face that kind of silence. They didn't talk much, They didn't move more than they had to. They focused on breathing slow, steady in through the nose, out through the mouth. The less you fight the cold, the longer you last. That was something every hunter learned the hard way. They sat close to the fire, but not for comfort, for control. If you panic, you burn energy. If you stay calm, your body keeps its strength. They knew that fear makes you colder, so they stayed quiet, letting their breath match the wind outside. Some nights, when storms trapped them for days, they saved their energy by resting together. No talk, no movement, just waiting. The old ones said the body can survive almost anything if the mind stays calm, and they proved it winter after winter. You can see it in old stories and journals, men sitting still in the snow for hours, faces blank breath, thin but steady. They weren't frozen, they were focused. They didn't see the cold as an enemy, it was just part of the land. That kind of patience kept them alive when everything else failed, because warmth wasn't only fire or food, it was the discipline to stay calm when the world turned white. They made it through the cold, not because the fire stayed alive, but because they knew how to live when it didn't. Every small thing mattered: how they breathed, how they moved, how they waited. Each ember, each hand, each bit of warmth was used, shared, and remembered. They didn't depend on luck or comfort. They depended on rhythm, on patience, on each other. The Lakota, the Mandan, the Pawnee all carried the same truth. Warmth was never only about fire. It was about how you stayed calm, how you worked, how you rested. Even when the last flame was gone, they still found ways to stay alive. That's why their knowledge lasted. It wasn't just survival, it was memory passed through breath and time. The teepee stands quiet now. The fire is almost gone, only a few red spots left under the ash. You can hear the wind outside, soft and steady. Inside, there's no panic. The people lie close, breathing slow, hands under hides. What keeps them warm now isn't the flame, it's what they built together. Every ember came from effort. Every bit of heat was earned by work, by patience, by care. The warmth stays even when the light is gone, because the fire was never just wood and spark. It was how they lived, how they endured, and that part never fades. Stay by the fire.